When it comes to next week's UCLA game, Penn State is going to be a massive favorite.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It is a Locked On crossover to look ahead to next week's matchup between Penn State and UCLA. I am Zach Seyko of Locked On Nittany Lions. He is Zach Anderson-Yoximer of Locked On UCLA. And thanks for joining us as, yes, I know Penn State plays Illinois, and yes, I know UCLA is getting set to take on Oregon, but we want to give an early preview, share some initial thoughts about how Penn State and UCLA will match up with each other. And, you know, Zach and Zach here to bring it all to you. My first initial thoughts about this game, Zach of Locked On UCLA, is that Penn State is probably going to be a 3, maybe even a 4 touchdown favorite in this game. I think maybe somewhere in the middle is realistic, minus 24 on the spread or something like that. It also hurts UCLA that this is going to be a noon Eastern time kickoff. This is Pacific time for the Bruins. I just don't see this being an ideal matchup from the word go for your Bruins, Zach.
Yeah, this is a part of a stretch for UCLA where they go to LSU, they host Oregon, and then they go to Penn State. And the funny thing is maybe the best team they faced was Indiana. Who knows, right? That's the joke, right? That they started Big Ten play and they got thrashed, right, by a bunch of points against the Hoosiers. And they're still undefeated to this point that we're doing this show. So who knows what it's going to look like, but it is a rough stretch, and it would probably be a rough one. I think the spread's probably what you're thinking.
And I mean, that's because UCLA is going through a bunch of wholesale changes. Penn State makes one change, and they fired Mike Yurcich and brought in Andy Kotelnicki, and it's worked out very well. But something that was abrupt, I could have never seen this coming in a million years, but that Chip Kelly takes a demotion and leaves as the head coach of UCLA to become the offensive coordinator at Ohio State. And now Deshaun Foster's the head coach at UCLA. They did bring in probably one of the best coaches in the entire sport, and I never thought he'd be a college coach, and that's Eric Bieniemy as the offensive coordinator. But the reason Penn State is way ahead of UCLA at this point in time is because of consistency. Okay, Penn State returns a lot of its roster. You had a coaching overhaul. You have someone who's, from what I know, is a first-time head coach in Foster. Bieniemy's the first time, or it's been a long time since he's been at the college level. He's been with the Kansas City Chiefs, and this is a different version of college football than what he remembers. So the Bruins are trying to put it all together when the best asset they had a season ago was D'Anton Lynn, and he ends up going to USC because UCLA's defense was one of the best in the country a season ago.
They're really good. And the thing that Lynn inherited was a spectacular defensive line. This year, all that talent is pretty much gone, especially the pass rushers, because they went to the NFL. The secondary, they followed Lynn, 2 of them, John Humphrey and Kamari Ramsey. They followed him to USC, which left a good linebacker room. You got an in-house DC promoted upwards, and then there's just not a lot to bring this year. But it was also a rough transition because Chip Kelly, he wasn't recruiting, right? He didn't care about recruiting. He didn't care about building an image of UCLA. And then next thing you know, he just dips. I think it was embarrassing for UCLA that they didn't fire him, right? They should have a long time ago if they had the opportunity to. But in the end, he made his move so late in the offseason. UCLA's class of 24 recruiting is just not where it needs to be. And regardless of what you think about if Deshaun Foster is in over his head, he kind of is because of the situation. Yeah. Regardless of the first-time coaching, regardless of if he's a fit, anybody put in this situation that late in the game was going to be going against it, all right? Now, can Deshaun Foster climb UCLA out of a hole? Maybe not this year. Will it be a 2-3 year cycle? I don't know. But this is a team that was already going to hurt defensively. But Bieniemy, it just hasn't worked out so far with an offense that returned a few pieces, has a deep receiver room, even though the numbers don't prove it. It's up to the trenches. And so far, the Bruins, they're not living up to what the Big Ten's billing is, living in the offensive line and dominating on the defensive line.
And that's where the battle is. You ask tons and tons of football coaches, and probably 9 out of 10 of them would say the battle is one up front. It's one in the trenches, Zach, as you have pointed out. So Penn State has a lot of advantages here. Coaching, consistency, veteran experience. The playmakers as well, the guys that you mentioned, especially on the defensive side, that really kept UCLA in games last year, either went off to the NFL or followed D'Anton Lynn to his next destination at USC. And Penn State was able to retain a good amount of its core. I mean, certainly there's natural attrition just because college athletics is typically 4 to 5 years for a player at this level. But, and we, of course, I know, COVID eligibility and everything else, but typically 4 to 5 years. And Penn State still has its nucleus in place of the Drew Aller, of Nicholas Singleton, Katron Allen, a Trey Wallace, a Tyler Warren on offense. And then defensively, I mean, they brought back guys that were supposed to leave for the NFL and didn't. And then guys that were rumored to, maybe make a change and go into the transfer portal, and they were able to retain them. So Penn State, it just in a much better situation than what UCLA is, and I think it's an ideal matchup. And I'm not trying to look past Illinois by having this conversation, but I think it's a good start to get our initial thoughts out there. And we'll talk about this matchup a little bit more, what UCLA does do well this season and what they can expect from Penn State. We'll talk about that on the other side of this break. With Robinhood Gold, you don't need a silver spoon to eat up the financial favors of the 1%. Robinhood Gold allows you to get the rates and perks usually reserved for the highest society. Now, the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn the very liberal rate of 4.5% APY on uninvested cash, receive unlimited 1% deposit bonuses, and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on an IRA account. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of a high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at Robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply. For product-specific disclosures, visit Robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. Rate may change. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold, LLC. Today's crossover episode is also brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. PrizePicks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. All you do is pick more or less on a 2 to 6 player stat projection and watch those winnings roll in. You can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. And PrizePicks is the only real money daily fantasy platform with an injury insurance policy so that your lineups will stay in play even if one of your players gets hurt. If your player leaves in the first half and does not return, PrizePicks keeps your picks alive if that player gets injured. PrizePicks puts their members first, so all withdrawals are fast. All withdrawals are safe, secure. When your picks hit, you can get your money as quickly as 15 minutes. Download the PrizePicks app today and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege and you'll get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONCollege on PrizePicks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. That's PrizePicks. Run your game. So Zach of Locked On UCLA, what do you want to specifically know about Penn State? I talked about they got a lot of good talent. They got veteran talent. They've improved the coaching staff just by making this one change at offensive coordinator. And yes, they did bring in a new defensive coordinator because Manny Diaz left. But everything's kind of settled in here, and they still have veteran playmakers that put them in the college football playoff conversation. Is there anything, because UCLA has Ethan Garber's back. They have talent. I just think it's a matter of chemistry and being outcoached in a lot of spots.
Yeah, for UCLA, the big thing, one, is the offense is so complex. They've struggled to pick it up, right? Chip Kelly's offense is a genius, but it's not complex. The West Coast offense, the West Coast scheme run by Bieniemy, it was dominated when it was at the Chiefs, right? When you had Patrick Mahomes, you had an Andy Reid, you had geniuses all amongst everything, physical, mental gifts at almost every position, winning a couple of Super Bowls. It didn't exactly pan out the best the same way at the Commanders. You can't exactly compare this year's Commanders team because they got Jaden Daniels compared to Sam Howell and a poor offensive line in 23 to 24. And then what Bieniemy inherited was a poor offensive line that not even Chip Kelly could have handled protecting his own quarterback last year, but managed a lot better to run the football. So for me, how strong would you say that Penn State defensive line is? And then two, Zach, what do you think? This is the Penn State team that gets over the hump, right? The joke is they're the third best team in the Big Ten, arguably, right? Michigan is up for grabs. We don't really know so much about them this year, other than they beat USC. This is a team that could be second, third in the Big Ten. Is this the Nittany Lion team that gets over that hump and gets into the 12-team CFP?
So as far as the trenches go, the offensive line was the biggest question mark for Penn State's team. And for this, aside from linebacker depth, I would say those two position groups had at least the biggest concerns out of any position group. And the offensive line has done well to this point. I think they need bigger tests. I still have my concerns, but they're doing better than expected, which is a step in the right direction. They're trending in the right direction. For Penn State's defensive line, I mean, that was a group that helped with Manny. I know Manny Diaz was the defensive coordinator, but that team led the country in yards per carry against. So in terms of holding opponents to yards per carry, they were number one in the country. I think it was 2.3 yards per carry a season ago, and they're continuing that. This is a veteran defensive line. Abdul Carter comes down from the linebacker position to defensive end, which hasn't been pretty to this point. But he's still such an overall great football player that his better days of football are ahead of him at defensive end. And then to answer your question about, the running joke is that Penn State's always third fiddle to Ohio State and Michigan, but now Oregon essentially replaces Michigan in this conversation because we don't know how. The Wolverines have a great defense, elite defense, top five, and honestly, if they had an offense that could play a little more complementary football, they would be number one in the country. But top five is pretty complimentary in itself in that respect too. So for Penn State, there is an opportunity to make the Big Ten championship without the divisions. If they can get a couple of things to break for them, like I think USC is going to be a challenge out on the West Coast. That is your first road, like your true road game to the West Coast. And it's wedged in the middle of the season right before you go back on the road to Wisconsin, then ultimately play Ohio State, which is going to be the big game for Penn State. They can do it. I think that they do need a break or two to go 11-1, and then hopefully the same thing. So you're kind of asking Oregon to lose a game they're not expected to, and Penn State to win one more than they're expected to, because I have them going 10-2, losing to USC and Ohio State because of the circumstance. I think they're better than USC on a neutral field, but out in Southern California, I just don't like that road trip right then and there.
Yeah, it's a big thing. I mean, after USC literally got the rock pounded on them in the big house, right? I think they're all a little overrated, and that win against LSU might be an overrated win. I saw LSU; they played a little bit equal to the Bruins in that first half a week ago. So we'll see if USC is actually that team that can rise above. I think we all expected them to dominate Michigan, and they just did not. Right? I think that was a glaring sign. And so I think that's a big thing for Penn State. You guys could probably go beat them in US. The Coliseum's not that daunting. Unless you're a UCLA fan and it's UCLA, USC, or maybe Notre Dame. I'm not sure it's that daunting, right? It can be cool. It can be old, but it can be packed. It's not that daunting. Southern California is not crazy. It's not a whiteout.
It's not a college town, yeah.
It's not a stripe out energy, right? It's not the same as what Penn State can bring to the table.
No, and I think that's a good point about the atmosphere. I'm more intrigued by the road trip itself, because it's different when you have a month to prepare, a month to get healthy, and then you're playing that Pac-12 school for the Rose Bowl. Now you have this in the middle of the season after you play in Illinois, a UCLA, and then you take that 6-hour flight in the middle of the season, in the middle of classes. I get it. Nobody has been prepared for conference realignment to this point, so I'm saying it's also going to affect Penn State in ways that we just can't comprehend just yet.
Yeah, it'll be a fun one for sure. But I mean, come on, what? USC just lost the Bear, right? Bear Alexander. There's all sorts of players just leaving in the middle of the season. Who knows who's next? I'm not well versed in that situation at all to truly comment on it. But we just know this is a crazy, crazy thing. One thing for you, Seyko, what do you think that UCLA fans, if they're going to this Penn State game, should look out for? As a fan.
I mean, this is the first, right? This is the first Pac-12 team to come to Beaver Stadium for the conference realignment. So it's not Washington, it's not USC, it's not Oregon. UCLA gets to kick things off. I hate that this is a noon game for UCLA and UCLA fans. I wish it would have been a 3:30 game, because I think that just would have been more appropriate there. But this, I mean, it's going to be a little bit of a culture shock. I think it'll be fun for UCLA. I mean, for the Kent State game, there were 109,000 people. Penn State is a 48-point favorite going into that game, 49-point favorite, and 109,000 people still show up to Beaver Stadium for that game. I think that's impressive. So if you can get that kind of crowd for one of the worst 5 teams in all of FBS football, then what about UCLA? Yes, they're on the lower half of the Big Ten, but I think just that excitement. There's a reason that Fox wanted to pick this game up and put it at noon. I think that excitement for Penn State to finally welcome in the Pac-12 teams to the Big Ten will just kind of set the tone for the entirety of the game.
Yeah, it'll be UCLA's first real Big Ten road game, all right? They got the Big Ten game out of the way playing in Indiana. You go to LSU, right? You get that. You get Oregon, all right? That's not the same. They've been there, done that, right? That's an old mistress. Then you got Penn State, and it's all right, that's a first real true Big Ten road game. Although you could argue those are two of the best atmospheres in all of college football, and UCLA has to play them back-to-back at LSU and at Penn State. And they didn't get the best of LSU because it was a midday, hot Southern Louisiana day.
I think I'll say this about UCLA. Penn State has every advantage that you can look at in this matchup: quarterback, running back, coaching, offensive line, defensive line. But UCLA might even play relaxed in that case. Penn State is kind of in a look-ahead spot. They have that road trip. They're getting the favor returned to them by going to Southern California and playing the other California school in USC. So there is a chance for Penn State to get caught, and it's UCLA. They're rebuilding. How seriously do we have to take them? Yes, Penn State takes every opponent seriously, but UCLA might come in and just kind of be a bull in a china shop, essentially, because they don't. I don't know that UCLA has anything to lose in this case, whereas Penn State has everything to lose if they're not careful.
You mentioned one word that I want to go with this, all right? Bear with me. You said bowl. Bowling Green. Tell me about that.
Bowling Green, to keep it short, just to kind of wrap this up, because we intend to have another crossover preview in depth about these two teams. But Bowling Green, I think it's just better than people give them credit for. MAC conference, you automatically think that they're just going to roll over. That is a team with 30 plus seniors. I think Penn State was in that. They too much energy caught up in the West Virginia game, so not as much juice returning home against that non-conference opponent, since it is a Bowling Green. But look what they did. They went to Texas A&M and went down to the wire. It was 26-20, so they are a legitimate team and very well could win the MAC conference title. I'm looking forward to this UCLA matchup, and I'm looking forward to it when we cover it a little more in depth and talk some X's and O's and actually compare matchups. But just wanted to get some initial thoughts out there for all of you. So go check out Locked On UCLA. Make sure you subscribe to both channels, Locked On Nittany Lions and Locked On UCLA. Zach, thanks so much for the time, and I can't wait to chat again very soon to preview the game itself a little more in depth.
Yeah, hopefully we're both coming off wins, one more likely than the other. But, go Bruins. Thanks, Zach. Can't wait to chat with you pretty soon.